It was 11:47 at night when my phone lit up with a text from my uncle. "She's your problem now. We're done." That was it. No explanation, no warning. Just 7 words, and a photo of my grandmother sitting alone on a bench outside the Greyhound station on 5th in November, with one rolling suitcase and a plastic grocery bag next to her feet. The temperature that night was 34 degrees. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this story. My grandmother, I call her Grandma Lou, always have, everyone does, is 81 years old. She has a bad hip. She walks with a cane she named Gerald, because she said a cane that old and reliable deserves a name. She spent 42 years working as a school cafeteria manager in our county, got up every morning at 4 a.m. to make sure other people's kids had something warm to eat. She raised 3 children mostly on her own after my grandfather passed in 1987. She is not a burden. She is not a problem. And she was sitting on a bench in 34-degree weather because her own son decided she was too inconvenient to deal with anymore. I called her immediately. She picked up on the second ring, which told me she'd been holding the phone, waiting. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, and her voice was so steady it broke my heart. She was trying not to scare me. "Grandma Lou, where are you right now? Are you inside?" "I'm just out front, honey. I'm okay. I just wasn't sure who to call." I was already grabbing my keys. It took me 22 minutes to get to that bus station. I know because I watched the clock the entire drive, talking to her the whole time, asking her to tell me about whatever she wanted, her neighbor's new puppy, the book she'd been reading, anything. Just so I could hear her voice and know she was still there. When I pulled up and saw her sitting under that one weak overhead light, her coat buttoned all the way up to her chin, her cane leaning against her knee, I had to sit in the car for 10 seconds before I got out because I did not want her to see me cry. She saw me anyway. She always does. "Oh, don't you make that face," she said when I hugged her. "I'm fine. I'm tougher than I look." "I know you are," I said. "That's not why I'm making this face." I got her into the car and blasted the heat. She smelled like the lavender soap she's used my entire life, and her hands were ice cold when she held mine for a second before I put the car in drive. She didn't say much on the way home. Neither did I. There are things you feel in your chest that don't have words yet. I want to back up, because this didn't come from nowhere. Nothing like this ever does. My grandmother owned her house free and clear. A 3-bedroom in the same neighborhood she'd lived in for 38 years. She paid it off in 2009. After my grandfather died, she'd been careful with money her whole life, the way people who lived through hard times tend to be. She had a savings account. She had her Social Security coming in every month, $1,340, plus a small pension from the school district. She wasn't rich, but she was stable. She was comfortable. She'd worked too hard for too long to be anything else. My uncle moved in with her in 2019. That was the official story. He was going through a divorce, needed somewhere to land for a few months, and Grandma Lou said of course, because she's Grandma Lou. And that's what she does. A few months became a year became 2. Then his girlfriend moved in, then they had a baby. And then, gradually, the house that my grandmother owned stopped feeling like hers. I didn't see it happening in real time. I live about 40 minutes away, and for a while things seemed okay. I'd come on Sundays for dinner. Grandma Lou seemed happy to have the company, happy to have a baby in the house. But there were things I noticed and pushed aside. Little things. The way my uncle would talk over her. The way her room, the master bedroom she'd slept in for decades, had been quietly moved to the smaller guest room because it made more sense for the baby to have the bigger space. The way she stopped mentioning her savings account in conversations, and when I asked once, she just smiled and said everything was fine. I should have asked more questions. I know that now. About 8 months before that night at the bus station, I started noticing other things. Grandma Lou's car had been borrowed and never given back. When she mentioned wanting to visit her sister in Tucson for Christmas, my uncle told her the timing didn't work. When her doctor changed some of her medications and she needed a ride to a follow-up appointment, she called me instead of him. And when I asked why, she said, "Oh, he's busy. They're all busy." I took her to that appointment. In the waiting room, she mentioned almost in passing that she'd lent my uncle some money for a car repair. $4,000. She said it like she expected me to accept it as completely normal. "When is he paying you back?" I asked. She looked at the fish tank in the corner of the waiting room for a moment. "We didn't really set a date," she said. That was the first time I started keeping notes. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not in law enforcement. I'm a 31-year-old woman who works as a hospital billing coordinator, which means I spend my entire professional life dealing with paperwork, documentation, and the slow bureaucratic weight of systems that only move when you push them exactly right. I know how to build a paper trail. I know what records matter, and something in my gut, in that waiting room, told me I needed to start building one. Over the next several months, I wrote down every conversation, dates, times, what was said. I kept copies of text messages. I started gently asking Grandma Lou questions and writing down what she told me. When she was lucid and calm and talking normally, not upset, not under pressure, I wasn't trying to build a case, I was just trying to understand what was happening. What I understood, eventually, was that over the course of 3 years, approximately $31,000 had moved from my grandmother's savings account into accounts my uncle controlled. Not all at once, never all at once, small chunks, car repair, new HVAC system, help with the hospital bill. Just until payday. The account that used to have a comfortable buffer was nearly empty. I also found out, through Grandma Lou, over the course of several careful conversations, that my uncle had approached her about putting his name on the deed to her house. She'd said she wasn't sure. He'd asked again and again. The last time he asked, his girlfriend had been in the room, and Grandma Lou said the whole conversation made her feel like she was being surrounded. She hadn't signed anything. But she was scared. I want to be honest about something. I loved my uncle once. He taught me to ride a bike. He drove me to the SAT because my mom had to work. There's a version of him from my childhood that I still carry around. And it made what I was looking at much harder to accept. But the evidence doesn't care about your feelings. The evidence is the evidence. 3 weeks before that night at the bus station, I called Adult Protective Services. That's the call I'd been building toward without fully knowing it. I'd been on their website at midnight more times than I could count, reading about financial exploitation of the elderly, reading about what constitutes elder abuse under our state statutes, reading about what documentation they needed and what the intake process looked like. When I finally called, I was on the phone for over an hour. The caseworker I spoke to, I won't say her name, but I will say she was calm and professional and completely without judgment, told me that what I was describing sounded like a pattern consistent with financial exploitation, and that they would open an investigation. I did not tell my uncle. I also called an elder law attorney the next day. I'd found her through my hospital's employee assistance program, which offers a certain number of free consultations per year, and she agreed to see me the following week. I brought everything. The notes, the printed text messages, the screenshots of bank statements Grandma Lou had given me access to after I explained what I was looking into. The attorney went through everything carefully and then looked at me over her glasses and said, "You did the right thing coming in now. These situations tend to escalate." I didn't know how fast. The APS investigation had barely begun when my uncle apparently sensed that something had shifted. I don't know exactly what tipped him off. Maybe Grandma Lou mentioned something. Maybe he just noticed a change in her demeanor. Whatever it was, within 10 days of my APS call, the dynamic in that house went from cold to something I don't have a polite word for. Grandma Lou called me one evening, speaking quietly, almost whispering, telling me that there'd been an argument, that his girlfriend had said things to her, that she'd been told, more or less explicitly, that she was a guest in her own home, and that guests didn't get to make demands. Then came the night at the bus station. He didn't even take her to her house. He put her in the car, drove to the Greyhound station across town, and texted me from the parking lot while she was getting out of the car. I found that out later, from Grandma Lou. She said he didn't say much. He took her suitcase out of the trunk and handed it to her, and told her that living arrangements were changing, and that she should call someone. She was wearing her winter coat, thank God. She'd thought to grab that. The night I brought her home, she slept in my bed, and I slept on the couch, and I lay there in the dark making a list on my phone of everything I needed to do in the morning. I didn't sleep much. I kept thinking about the temperature outside, and about how long she'd been on that bench before I got there, and about the fact that if she hadn't had a phone, or if her phone had been dead, or if I'd been traveling, or 100 other things. I couldn't finish those thoughts. I just kept coming back to the list. First thing the next morning, I called the elder law attorney and told her what had happened. She said this changed things significantly and that we needed to move on guardianship. She also said I should file a police report, which I did that afternoon, not because I expected anything to happen immediately, but because I needed it on record. The officer who took my report was matter-of-fact, not dismissive. He said that abandonment of a vulnerable adult was taken seriously, and that depending on what the investigation turned up, there could be criminal exposure. I called APS and updated them as well. The caseworker I'd been working with said that the abandonment, combined with the financial information I'd already provided, would significantly accelerate their timeline. In the meantime, Grandma Lou settled into my apartment with a dignity that I still think about. She didn't complain. She made herself useful, started making coffee every morning, reorganized my spice cabinet, critiqued my grocery choices in a way that was so familiar and so her that it made me laugh every single time. She slept better than she had in years, she told me. She hadn't realized how tense she'd been until she wasn't anymore. One morning, about a week after she arrived, I sat down with her at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and walked her through everything I'd been doing and everything I'd found. I hadn't told her the full scope of it before. I hadn't wanted to worry her until I had something concrete. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. $31,000, she said finally. That's what the statements show. Maybe more. She looked out the window. I always thought he'd pay it back, she said. I kept telling myself he just needed time. I know. I worked so hard for that money. She said it simply, without anger, and somehow that was worse than anger. I know you did, I said, and we're going to get it back. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and said, "You sound very sure of that." "I am," I said, and I meant it. The guardianship petition was filed 6 weeks after that morning. The attorney was thorough and efficient and, I suspect, quietly furious on Grandma Lou's behalf, in a way that she kept professionally contained. We had documentation of the financial transfers. We had the APS report, which by that point was substantial. We had the police report. We had a statement from Grandma Lou's primary care physician about her cognitive status. Fully intact, sharp as ever, but increasingly anxious and showing signs of stress-related health impacts during the period she'd been living in that house. And we had my records. 2 years of notes, dates, conversations, a timeline so detailed that the attorney said she'd rarely seen a family member come in this prepared. My uncle hired an attorney of his own. He contested the petition. He claimed Grandma Lou had given the money willingly, that she'd been a full and equal participant in decisions about the household, that she was confused and being manipulated by me. He used that word specifically. Manipulated. Grandma Lou testified at the hearing. She sat in that chair in her good blue blazer, the one she wears to things that matter, and she answered every question in a clear, steady voice. She described the timeline. She described the conversations about the deed. She described the night at the bus station. She was 81 years old, and she was the most composed person in that room. When it was my uncle's attorney's turn to question her, he asked whether she'd ever felt that my uncle had acted in her best interest. She was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then she said, "He acted in his best interest. I just kept hoping those would be the same thing." There was no one in that courtroom who didn't understand exactly what she meant. The judge ruled in our favor. I was granted limited guardianship over Grandma Lou's financial affairs, which essentially meant that no one could touch her accounts or her property without going through a legal process first. The APS investigation, which concluded around the same time, documented findings of financial exploitation. That report was referred to the county district attorney's office. My uncle was charged with financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. That's a felony in our state. His attorney negotiated a plea that involved full restitution, all $31,000, plus a fine and 3 years of supervised probation. He did not go to prison. I have complicated feelings about that, but the money came back, which is what mattered most to Grandma Lou, and the record exists, and he cannot touch her finances again. The house. That took longer, and it was more complicated, but the short version is this. Because he was never added to the deed. Because Grandma Lou had never signed anything, no matter how many times he asked, the property remained entirely hers. He was required to vacate within 60 days of the court ruling. His girlfriend and the baby, too. I helped Grandma Lou go back to that house in March. We aired it out, repainted the master bedroom, and moved her back into the room she'd slept in for decades. She stood in the doorway of it for a long moment before she went in, just looking at it, and I didn't say anything because sometimes there isn't anything to say. We hung her curtains back up. The cream ones with the small yellow flowers that she's had since before I was born. She said, "Those are ugly, aren't they?" "I've always known they were ugly, deeply," I said. "But they're mine," she said. "They're yours." She smiled then and walked in and sat on the edge of her bed, and that was that. I get asked sometimes at work by friends who know pieces of this story whether I'm glad I did it, whether it was worth the stress, the time, the strain on the family. And I want to be honest, my uncle doesn't speak to me. His mother, my great-aunt, thinks I should have handled it privately. There are people in my family who think I made things worse. But I think about that bench. I think about 34 degrees and one rolling suitcase and a woman who spent her whole life getting up at 4 a.m. to take care of other people, sitting alone outside a bus station at midnight, not wanting to scare me. No, I don't have doubts. There's one more thing I want to say, and it's for anyone out there who's watching this and recognizing something they've seen in their own family, or something they're worried about right now. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a social worker. I'm just someone who paid attention and wrote things down and made the calls I needed to make. But here's what I wish someone had told me earlier. Adult Protective Services exists for exactly this situation. Calling them is not a betrayal. It is not an escalation. It is the system working the way it is supposed to work. Your state's Elder Law Bar Association can connect you with an attorney who specializes in this. Many hospitals and employee assistance programs offer free legal consultations. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult is a crime in every state in this country, and it is far more common than most people think and far more prosecuted than my uncle expected. Document everything. Dates, times, conversations, bank statements if you can access them legally. Your notes don't have to be perfect. They just have to be consistent and honest. And trust your gut. I knew something was wrong before I could prove it. That knowing matters. Don't wait until you have proof to start paying attention. Grandma Lou has coffee with me every Sunday now. She drives herself. Yes, she has her car back. And she brings whatever she's baked that week, which is usually something involving a quantity of butter that her cardiologist would find alarming. Last week, she brought a lemon pound cake and ate 2 slices herself without any apparent guilt. And when I pointed this out, she gave me a look that communicated, extremely clearly, that she is 81 years old and has survived worse than my commentary on her dietary choices. Gerald the cane is still going strong, by the way. She's okay. We're okay. And that bench outside that bus station is something I will never, as long